Hello and welcome to Total Training for Premiere Pro CS5 Essentials. My name is Luisa Winters and I am an Adobe certified instructor for several Adobe applications, including, of course, Premiere. I am also a frequent speaker at some national and international conferences. I have been using Premiere since version 3. I love using it and find it extremely powerful and versatile. After completing this course, you will be a lot more comfortable in Premiere Pro and will be able to edit videos on your own. This first chapter will serve as an introduction to how to get started using Premiere Pro. I would like to start by giving you a very quick overview of how Premiere Pro CS5 works. We will go in detail over some of these steps in other chapters, so don't worry too much if I skip over some of the details. This chapter is meant to be a very quick overview only. The basic workflow of Premiere Pro CS5 works like this. First, you need to capture your footage. You can use on location, which is included with Premiere Pro CS5, or you can use your camcorder, tape, whatever you want. But after you have captured your footage, you need to open Premiere Pro. When you open Premiere Pro, the first screen that you see is this one. I'm going to go ahead and click on the New Project icon, and the New Project panel opens up. In here, I'm going to select where I would like to save my project. If I don't save the project, I cannot work in Premiere Pro. So I'm going to click on Browse, which is right here. I'll navigate to the desktop, to the project files of Premiere Pro CS5 Essentials, Chapter 1, and I'm just going to click on Chapter 1 to select the folder, and I'll click on Choose. I'm going to name this project Overview. The new sequence settings appear. All you have to do is click OK. And this is now Premiere Pro. When you're in Premiere Pro, the first thing that you need to do is either capture or import your footage. We are going to talk about capturing a little bit later on in another chapter, so let's talk about importing the footage. For that, you go under File, Import, and you can import any footage that you may have already captured or that you may have already transferred from your camcorder directly to the computer. You can also use the media browser, which is located here. I am going to use the media browser. I'm going to navigate to the desktop. I'll make this panel a little bit larger. To the project files, to a folder called Media, and in here I'll select the folder called P2 Media. I'll tell you more about what P2 Media is and different types of media later on in the series. I'm going to import these two files, Bird on Sign and Boy and Pig, and I'm just going to drag them to the project panel. Now I have to place these files on my sequence, and for that I have to make sure that my sequence shares the same settings as my files. If I click on any of these files, let me make this a little bit larger, see that up here it gives you information on that file. It tells me that it's a movie, 1440 by 1080, and a pixel aspect ratio of 1.333. I'm going to go ahead and select a sequence preset that will match this. And for this one, I'm going to choose AVC Intra, 1080i, and AVC 50, going at 1080i, 60. So that's 60 fields per second, 29.97 frames per second. That's going to be the frame rate. And of course, a frame size of 1440 by 1080 and a pixel aspect ratio of 1.333, which matches my clip. I can just go ahead and double click this. I'm going to go ahead and rename this Overview. And there you go. It is open in here as well. Now all I have to do is add this clip to the timeline. I can zoom in by using the plus key or minus, and I can just play it back. I can keep on assembling my video. I'll add this one, which is boy and pig. I can zoom out a little bit. Now I will add a title, which by default is going to match my active sequence. I'll just write something like Title 1. I'll change the style, maybe to this. Position it like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and close it and drag it to track 2. And as you can see, my video is coming out fairly nicely. Now I'm going to add transitions. So I'm going to go to the Effects panel, Video Transitions, Dissolve, and I'm going to add cross dissolves not only to the title, beginning and end, but to the video itself. And now it should just fade up. And it does. I could add other effects like moving titles, color correction, anything I want. I'm going to skip that for now. And finally, I'm going to add some audio. So I'm going to go ahead and import an audio file. File, Import. I'm going to navigate to the Media folder in my Project Files folder. And in here, there is an audio folder. And I'm going to select the Vals Romantica, which is an MP3 file. I'll click on Open. And now that appears in here, I will drag this to the timeline. Let me go ahead and expand this a little bit so we can see it better. And there it is. Now I'm just going to trim it a little bit so that it is the same length as my video. And I'm going to add an audio crossfade, constant power to the end so that the audio also fades out. And now I'll just play it back. And I look at it, I make sure that I'm happy with it, I adjust it if I need to, and after I'm happy with it, it is time to export it. To export it, I'm just going to go File, Export, and I can export it as media, I can export it to tape, Final Cut XML, Avid OMF, any of those, AAF, etc., etc. Or I can just choose Adobe Dynamic Link and I can send it to Anchor to create a DVD, whether it's standard DVD or Blu-ray, or even to export it to a flash DVD. The Mercury engine in Adobe Premiere Pro CS5 is a native 64-bit multi-core and GPU accelerated technology created to provide high performance. You can work in real time on complex timelines and long-form projects. You can also open really fast, really long projects, and you can work on most formats without rendering. You can also have real-time effects. Premiere Pro CS5 is 64-bit operating system only, and the Mercury engine works with NVIDIA CUDA technology. To fully take advantage of this, you would have to have one of the approved graphic cards. The list is updating constantly, so I will direct you to the Adobe website where you can find this information really easily. Now, if you look at the effects panel, you're going to see that there are these icons in here. There's the accelerated effects. These are the ones that are accelerated by this Mercury engine in conjunction with the CUDA technology. Notice that I don't have one of the approved cards in my system, so none of them is highlighted. You can also separate the effects by 32-bit effects and, of course, YUV effects. You could also go to the project settings, under Project Settings, General, and here at the bottom, where it says Video Rendering and Playback, if I were using one of the approved CUDA cards, I would see a drop-down menu in which I could choose the Mercury Playback, hardware, or software only. Right now, it says software only because that's all I have. Even if you don't have one of the approved CUDA cards, the Mercury engine is accelerating the performance of your system. In this chapter, we will go over the basics of Premiere Pro, starting with setting up a sequence, changing preferences, and customizing workspaces. By the end of this chapter, you should be comfortable with the workspace and creating a sequence. This chapter will be the starting point of your work in Premiere Pro. I would like to go a little bit more in depth on starting a new project. When you first start Premiere Pro, like we saw earlier, we see this panel, which is the Welcome to Premiere Pro panel. The last 5 projects that we've worked on will appear in here. As you can see, the overview project that we used in the last chapter shows up in here. Let's go ahead and click on the new project icon, and as you see, a new panel opens in here. Let's talk a little bit more about these options. As you can see, there are 2 tabs, General and Scratch Disks. We'll go to General first. And it's divided in sections, as you can see here. The first section is for the action and title safe areas. They refer to the overscan of certain monitors. What this means is that some TV monitors show more pixels than others. So, if you want to make sure that your titles and important content shows up in your client's TV, then you will want to keep those inside these boundaries. These settings are good, so we will leave them alone. The next section is the video display format. You can choose from this drop-down menu how you want Premiere to display the time increments in the timeline. You can choose from timecode, feet and frames for 16 and 35 mm film, in case you are working with film. And lastly, we see frames. For our purposes now, we will leave the display on timecode. Next, we see the audio display format, which could be audio samples or milliseconds. For our purposes now, we will leave it at samples. What this means is how we can go in between audio waveforms for more precise editing. If we have a video division in frames, that may not be precise enough for fine-tuned audio work. Being able to work at a sample level will give us a great degree of control. All right, the next section has to do with capturing. We can choose between DV and HDV. For our purposes now, we're going to leave it at DV. Finally, we see the section on video rendering and playback. This refers to the CUDA acceleration. If you have in your system an approved CUDA accelerated video card, then this option becomes available and you can choose between software render only, which is what I have here, or using the hardware to help you with your video previews and render. This is one of the new features of Premiere Pro. As you can see in my system, I do not have one of these cards, so the option is not available and my previews and renders will happen through software only. The next section refers to the location where we want to save the project. To select it, click on the Browse button. Now I'm going to go ahead and select Chapter 02 from my Project Files folder. And I'll just click Choose. I will name this project 01, and now I can click OK. However, before I click OK, I would like to navigate to the Scratch Disks tab and discuss these settings a little bit. In here, you can choose where you want for the captured video, captured audio, video previews, and audio previews to go. Notice that all of these drop-down menus say Same as Project. This is what Premiere Pro will give you by default, so I'm going to go ahead and leave all of them to Same as Project, and now I'm ready to click OK. A new panel opens. This is the new sequence panel. The sequence is where we will be working on the most. This will be the timeline that we will use to edit the video. This sequence should match the video and audio settings of your raw footage. Luckily for us, Premiere Pro has included a ton of presets for us to use. From the different codecs, AVC Intra, AVC HD, digital SLRs, etc., I am sure that no matter what you shoot on, you're going to find a preset in here that will fit your needs. If you're not sure about which preset to use in your projects, go ahead and choose any of these presets. This will get Premiere started, and once in Premiere, you'll be able to see your footage settings and you'll be able to create a new sequence that matches it. For now, let's go ahead and choose this preset, which is DV-NTSC Standard 48, and to get it started, I'm just going to go ahead and double-click it. And this gets Premiere started. Now, before we can know if this sequence will work for us, we need to know what kind of files we have. So let's go ahead and import a file so that we can check these settings. For that, I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the Media Browser panel, which is this one right here. And I'm going to choose the desktop. Now that I am in the Project Files folder, I'm going to navigate to the Media folder, and I'll double-click on the P2 Media folder, and I'm just going to choose this clip right here named Boy on Beach. To import it into Premiere, I'm just going to drag it from the Media Browser to the Project panel. And this imports it. Once in the project panel, you can select it by clicking on it once, and you will see information regarding the clip right up here. In here, we can see that it is indeed a movie. You can see the frame size, 1440 by 1080. We can see the pixel aspect ratio, which is 1.333. We can see the length of the video and the frame rate, which in this case is NTSC 29.97 frames per second. Finally, at the bottom here, we can see audio information, which includes sampling rate, bit depth, and mono, stereo, or 5.1 audio channels. This information in here is enough for me to find the sequence setting that is appropriate for me to use. So let's go ahead and create a new sequence. There are several ways to create a new sequence. I can go File, New, Sequence. I can also use the shortcut, which is Control-N on Windows systems, Command-N on Mac. And I can also click on this new item icon at the bottom of the project panel, and I can choose Sequence. Either way is fine. I'm just going to go ahead and click on Sequence here. And let's talk a little bit more in depth about this panel. First, let's notice that there are 3 tabs in here: the Sequence Presets, General, and Tracks. The Sequence Presets are exactly that. They are preset settings that we can use when we know what type of footage we have. I am pretty sure that you will find in here a preset that matches your footage. But there are many presets in here, so you may have to start clicking around if you're not sure. In our case, we're going to go to the AVC Intra folder, 1080i folder, and the preset that we want is the AVC I50 1080i 60. So this one. If you look closely at the settings, you're going to see that these video, audio, and everything settings match exactly what my footage parameters are. So it might take you a little bit to find yours, especially if you're not sure, But be patient, you will eventually find the preset that works for you. There are, however, instances in which you need to use very specialized settings. Maybe you're using a screen capture from a computer, or maybe from scientific instruments that save in an unconventional format. If, for whatever reason, you do not find a preset that suits you, then you need to go to the next tab, the General tab. In here, the first selection refers to the editing mode, which is this drop-down menu right here. You can change the editing mode to any of these codecs. Chances are, however, that if you did not find a preset that suits you, it's because you are editing unconventional footage. So for this, go ahead and choose Desktop. Now you can further modify the remainder of the choices. If you choose one of the other editing modes, then you are a lot more limited in your available choices. For example, if I choose any of these, notice that I can no longer change the frame size. The pixel aspect ratio becomes fixed. So for our purposes now, let's go ahead and leave it at Desktop. All of these settings become now available for us to change. To know which settings you are going to need, you will need to import the footage, select it in the project panel, and see its settings, just like what we did before. Choose those same settings in here and you should be all set. Notice here at the bottom where there is a setting for video preview. This is the file format that Premiere Pro will use to create any preview files it may need to create to display your video. Once you're happy with your chosen settings, you can create a new preset by clicking on this button. The next tab is the Tracks tab. In here, you will be able to indicate to Premiere Pro how many video and audio tracks you want for the sequence to have and what kind of audio you would like to master to. The audio master setting does not need to match the source. You could shoot in stereo but master to surround 5.1. So this refers to the mastering of the audio. You can see the choices in here, mono, stereo, etc., etc. For right now, let's go ahead and leave it at stereo. Now, for the purposes of this lesson, I'm going to go ahead and click on the Presets tab, and I'm going to choose the one that I had before, which is the one that matches my footage. To use it, all I need to do is double-click it, and there you go. Now I have a second sequence in here. I'm going to go ahead and rename this one. For that, I'm going to click on the sequence name, and as you can see, it becomes highlighted, and now I can write any name I wish. I'm just going to type the name New. I have now two sequences in here. I have sequence 1, and I have, of course, New. I'm going to go ahead and click on the icon for sequence 1, and then I'm going to click on this trash can because I need to delete it. After all, the settings of this sequence did not match my clip. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of it. Now I have the new sequence and the Boy on Beach clip. Creating a new sequence is a very important but common thing to do. All you really need to keep in mind is that if you do not know which settings to use, all you need to do is import the footage and select it so you can see the settings. Then go to the New Sequence panel and choose the same settings in here. Chances are that you're going to find a preset that will match your clip settings perfectly well. For the rest of this chapter, you will notice that the sequence I named New at the end of the previous lesson has been retitled Sequence 1. You can either change the name of the sequence by just clicking on the text of the name and typing the new name, or leaving it and use the sequence we named New, the same as I'm using Sequence 1 for the rest of the chapter. The content is exactly the same, it's just the name that is different. Something that you should also check whenever you start a new project are the preferences settings. The preferences can be found under Premiere Pro, Preferences, if you're working on a Mac, and if you're on Windows, they are under Edit, Preferences. So I'm on a Mac right now, and I'll choose General. This opens a new panel, and in here we can see things like pre-roll and post-roll, how long in frames the video transition default duration will be, and how long in seconds the audio transition default duration will be. And of course, if I am bringing any kind of still images in here, how long they would last in the timeline. You will notice as we advance that it's going to be a playhead, which in Adobe World is known as a CTI, which stands for Current Time Indicator. Whether you want to show clip keyframes on new audio tracks and the new video tracks as well. More about keyframes a little bit later on. In here, you can also select if you want to play the work area after you render, and you can also default scale to frame size. Default scale to frame size refers to when you're working on a particular frame size on your sequence, and then you bring a file that does not match those settings, is either larger or smaller. Premiere can automatically default the scale of this file to whatever your sequence is. In other words, it's going to make it larger or smaller to fit your sequence. You can also set in here the behavior of the bins. For example, if you double click, you press and hold Control on Windows or Command on Mac, what happens if you double click? And of course, what happens if you press Alt on Windows or Option on the Mac if you double click the bin. So you can change these if you wish, and you can also choose to render the audio when rendering the video. These are usually the preferences that we navigate to the most. There are other preferences as well. There's one for appearance. I can make my display lighter or darker. I'm going to leave it at default. Audio, I can change what my audio behavior will be, things like auto match time. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. What my surround mix down type would be. If I want to hear the audio while scrubbing the timeline means when we grab the playhead or CTI and we move it back and forth across the timeline. Play audio means that I will hear some of these audio samplings while I'm scrubbing the timeline. I can also select the source channel mappings. This is important, and we will go over it when we talk about audio, but this is important for when we have a stereo clip and we need to process both channels differently. We will also talk about automation keyframe optimization that has to do with the audio mixer and automating these tasks. You can also change audio hardware and the buffer size, audio output mapping, auto save. This one is also important. You can automatically save your projects. Basically, this one is set to automatically save every 20 minutes and have a maximum of 5 project versions. So I can go back 100 minutes in the past as I work on my projects because of the auto save. So it's going to give me 5 versions of the project that I'm working on, and it's going to save on top of the earliest one every 20 minutes. I can change this to every 3 minutes or every 5 minutes, etc., etc. Capture, we will go over this when we talk about capturing, but I can abort capture on drop frames or just report them, etc., etc. For device control, I have 2 devices that I can have, DV or HDV. If I had a third-party hardware installed in here, maybe SDI or something, it will appear in here, maybe a Matrox card or something like that. I can also change the color of my labels. This refers to how my files are going to look in the project panel or in the timeline, so the colors that they're going to have, and what color Premiere is going to, by default, add to each particular clip. Media. When Premiere Pro imports video and audio in some formats, Premiere Pro processes and caches versions of these so that it can use them when generating previews. This improves performance because the files, once they are processed, do not need to be reprocessed. These preferences indicate where these files are going to be saved and whether or not you want to write some metadata information or even enable the linking, like in here, enable clip and XMP metadata linking, will happen when you import these files. So, just to reiterate, these settings refer to metadata and whether or not to link it and where to save any cached information. Memory refers to how much RAM you have in your system and how much you should reserve for other applications. So right now, for Premiere, we have 2.5 gig available of a total of 4, so I have left 1.5 gigs available for other applications. I have also chosen to optimize the rendering for performance rather than for memory. Player settings. The Adobe player is the default player, but some third-party players are installed with some capture cards. If I had one of those capture cards in here, the player will appear in this drop-down menu. The preferences for the titler refer to which characters are going to display on the style swatches and on the font browser. I can change those in here. More on that when we go to the titler. And the trim window is how much I'm going to trim when using certain shortcuts for video and for audio. So I can change this value here. Notice that it's measured in frames and the audio is measured in audio time units. And these are the preferences. Once you're done changing them to what you like, go ahead and click OK. The location of these panels and how big they are is known as a workspace. You could, for example, go to Window, Workspace, and you could choose a different one, say one for audio, for example. And that's going to change how Premiere looks because it's optimized for that audio workflow. You could go back to the editing workspace, and if you change something on the editing workspace or in any workspace, you can go back to the saved state of that workspace by selecting Reset Current Workspace. Click Yes, and there you go. You can also change the location of these panels. For example, I could grab this panel by the grip, which are these little dots right here, and I could move it by just clicking and dragging. Notice that it's giving me a light blue display. It's a preview of where this panel is going to go. If the preview looks like a rectangle and I release the mouse, basically my panel is going to be one more tab on that set of panels. But if I grab it and the preview looks like a trapezoid, what that means is that Premiere is going to add this panel in between the existing panels. It's going to be a tab by itself and it's just going to be squished in here in between the panels that were there to begin with. I can also close panels and I can open panels that are not open by default. Any panel that you want to open is going to live under Window, whatever, Capture, Effect Controls, Effects, Events, History, etc., etc. You can save a workspace by organizing your panels however you want them. Let me go ahead and reset the editing workspace. And now I'm going to make the project panel a little bit larger and this one as well. And now I'm going to save this workspace. Window, Workspace, New Workspace, and I'm just going to call it Luisa Editing. I'll click OK, and there you go. Now I have a Luisa Editing workspace. Notice that by default, if you're working on a Mac, Premiere added a shortcut for me. You can find shortcuts under Edit, Keyboard Customization. You can change any of the shortcuts to be whatever it is that you want them to be, and you can also save them. For example, if I want for File Import to just be the letter I could just click on Import, click on this side, and just press the letter I. Notice that it's giving me a warning. It's saying, oh, wait a minute. This is already set for the in point. So maybe we don't want to change that one. Maybe I want it to be Option I. There you go. Used to be Command I, now is Option I. I have just changed it. I could save the whole set by clicking here, but as it is, I'm going to go back to what I had, which is the Adobe Premiere Pro factory defaults. Notice in here as well, I can emulate the shortcuts for Final Cut Pro 7 and for Avid Express DV. Once you're done customizing, or you're done setting or selecting your keyboard shortcuts, all you have to do is click OK. Any media that you use in the project must live in the project panel. It is important to note that when we import media into Premiere Pro, we're not really importing the media into the project. What we're doing is that we are creating a link between the project and whatever you have saved in your hard drive. This is very important because if you delete or move this file from your hard drive, Premiere won't find it. And what is going to happen is that Premiere is going to show it to you as an offline file. You can also use the project panel to organize your files. For example, you can create bins or folders by clicking here. You can name them anything you want. You can also create storyboards, etc., etc. I'm going to select it and delete it. You can also expand this so that you can see a little bit more of the information that the project panel gives us about each and every clip. We can see things like frame rate, media start, media end, media duration, in point, out point, duration, etc., etc. But that's not all of the information that is available. Besides these columns here, if you go to the panel menu and you choose Metadata Display, you can select which of these metadata will be displayed in your project panel, from Dublin Core, Basic, Adobe PDF, Dynamic Media, etc., etc., so that you can view that information about your clip depending on your needs. You can also do a search in here. You go ahead and click Cancel. And I'm going to go ahead and reset the workspace. And there you go. You can also change the display that you have here in the project panel. The list view is what we see by default. You can also change it to an icon view, which shows you the first frame of a particular video clip. You can change the frame that it is displaying by just moving this little playhead or just playing the clip. And once you find the frame that you would like to display, just click on this little camera icon here, and that will change the poster frame. The poster frame is the frame that displays here. Then we see the Automate to Sequence icon. If we click here, a new panel will open, and we can automate a particular set of clips directly to the sequence. More on that later. You can do a search, create a new bin. This is the new item icon. If you click here, you can choose a new sequence, offline file, title, bars and tone, black video, color matte, and transparent video. And of course, the little trash can, which is the clear or delete icon, which will delete any item that is selected. I'm going to go back to a list view. I can also search by clicking here. And I can type whatever name I want. For example, I could type the name boy, and I know I already have a clip, Boy on the Beach. And that's just going to show me that particular clip or any other clip that contains boy in its name. I can also search and or find faces. Next to the project panel, we're going to see the source and the program panels, if you have it on editing workspace. I'm going to go ahead and drag the Boy on the Beach clip directly to the timeline. I'm going to zoom in by pressing the plus key a few times. If I want to play this clip, all I have to do is press the space bar. I can also click on these controllers here, play, stop toggle, or I can scrub the timeline by moving the CTI or current time indicator back and forth. So basically with this, I am just stating that the program panel displays whatever I have in the timeline. So whatever sequence 1 or sequence 2 or whatever my sequence is active at the moment, And whatever frame my CTI happens to be on top of, that's what's going to show here. And I can play it, I can pause it, I can use the shuttle, I can use the jug, I can select different displays, scopes, vector scopes, etc. More on that a little bit later when we're talking about color correction. I can also scrub this little CTI here, and that's going to be very similar to scrubbing this one here in the timeline. Look at these timecode numbers right here, 211, 211 here in the timeline as well. I can also set in and out points by clicking on these icons here. I can also press I for in and O for out. This lets me navigate to the in point. This lets me navigate to the out point. This will play the in to the out point. Let's see how that works. I for in, O for out. Now I'm going to play in to out. This icon here is a loop. So if I click it and now I play here, it's just going to loop. I will stop it. This icon here is for safe margins. This has to do with the overscan. This we already saw is the output icon. I can also perform a lift and an extract from here. More on that later. And of course I can export just one frame. This is important because many a times we need to export frames to create, say, artwork for a DVD cover or something like that. I can also add timeline markers or sequence markers by clicking on this icon right here. These two icons let me navigate to different edit points. The shortcut for these we're going to see a little bit later, but it is page up and page down. These are very important icons, and this lets me navigate back one frame at a time or forwards one frame at a time. The source panel is very similar to the program panel, except it deals with a source and not with what you have in the timeline. If I want to open any file on the source panel, all I need to do is double click it or drag it to the source panel. So I'm going to go ahead and double click this one from the project panel. And there you go. I see almost identical controls in here. Output, safe margins, loop, insert, overlay, export frame. Very similar to what we have here. We're going to see more of these a little bit later. Of course, my navigational ones, in point, out point, markers, and go to in point, go to out point, and of course play in to out. So very similar to what I had before, except this is dealing with a source. I can use this to fine-tune my edit, as we will see a little bit later on. There are a couple more panels that I would like to go over, and these are the media browser panel. As we saw before, all you really have to do is navigate to where your media is, and then just click on the folder that has the media, and the media will appear in here. Notice that this one is showing as Panasonic P2. I can go ahead and click the audio, and it's showing me the MP3s. I can select this multicam, and it's showing me these quick times or stills. I have these photos from Chicago, and it's showing them to me as JPEGs. I can also change which files I would like to see. And I can change also view as either file directory or AVCHD or whatever it is that I have. Notice that when I select the P2 folder, it shows view as Panasonic P2. To use these, as we saw before, all I have to do is click on them and drag them to the project panel, or I could just go ahead and double click it. It opens in the source panel, and from the source panel I can use it in the timeline. If I go ahead and do that, let me just show you real quick. If I go ahead and do that, as soon as I add it to the timeline, it gets added to the project panel as well. In here we see other panels. There's an info panel that shows us important information on any file that we happen to have selected. Start, end, duration, etc., and also properties on the particular file. In here, for example, it's telling us 29.97 frames per second, the frame size, pixel aspect ratio, etc. So in many cases, the info panel really helps us with our editing. The effects panel is a panel that we're going to be visiting a little bit later on. In here is where we can choose whatever effects and transitions we want to add to our clips. The history panel, on the other hand, is what we can use to go back as many steps as we have set in our preferences. In this case, we could go back to New Open Project. Notice that it's going step by step with everything that we did, from New Open to Create Sequence 01, Import Clip, Create Sequence, etc., etc. Every single panel has a panel menu, and that is this icon here. If you click on it, you're going to see that there are different options. For example, I could delete different things in here, and I could totally clear the history. If I clear the history, I won't be able to go back any steps. Going back step by step is identical to doing Control-Z on Windows or Command-Z on the Mac, which is of course undo. That is the same thing as edit, undo. There is one panel that I would like to show you that is not showing right now, so I'm going to go Window, Metadata. This is going to show you metadata information on any clip that we happen to have selected. In this case, is Boy on Beach. This is very similar to what is showing in the project panel, except it's showing it in a different display. And of course, I can also analyze it. More a little bit later on the speech-to-text transcript, where we're going to be transcribing a script.